There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something pressing down on your chest, like the house knows something is wrong even before you do. I noticed it first on a Tuesday. My son-in-law's car was in the driveway when it shouldn't have been. He was supposed to be at work. I pulled in slowly, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. Just sat. Something in my stomach tightened the way it used to before a hard conversation I wasn't ready for. I'm 68 years old. I've been reading rooms my whole life. 41 years running a regional trucking company will teach you that faster than anything. You learn to notice when someone's telling you the price they want, not the price they'll take. You learn to notice when a handshake is too firm. You learn when something doesn't add up. That Tuesday afternoon, standing in my own driveway, something didn't add up. I went inside. My son-in-law was sitting at my kitchen table with a folder in front of him. My daughter was standing at the counter with her back to me, pretending to look for something in the cabinet. They both startled when I came through the door. He closed the folder too fast. "Dad?" my daughter said. She turned around and smiled the way people smile when they've been caught. "You're home early." I wasn't home early. It was 2:45 in the afternoon, and I'd been at my accountant's office all morning and to the hardware store after that, and home was exactly where I was supposed to be. "I live here," I said. I put my keys on the hook by the door. I set my bag down. I walked to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of water, and I drank it slowly, watching them over the rim of the glass. My son-in-law kept his hand flacked on top of that folder, like he was afraid it might fly away. His name is Brandt. He's 41. He sells commercial insurance and he's very good at it, which means he's very good at making people feel comfortable right before he asks them for something. When my daughter first brought him home, I liked him. He had good manners. He remembered things. He asked about the business. For the first couple years, I genuinely liked the man. Then my wife got sick. Loretta was diagnosed 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. She's strong, God, she is strong. She kept working in her garden until she couldn't anymore. She never once complained in front of the grandchildren. But the illness changed things in the house, and it changed Brandt in ways I tried to tell myself I wasn't seeing. He started coming around more, which sounds like a good thing. It wasn't. He started asking questions, careful questions, the kind that seem like concern. "How's the business doing? Are you thinking about selling? Have you and Mom talked about estate planning? Do you have a financial advisor you trust?" And I answered, not fully, not with numbers, but I answered, because I wanted to believe he was just worried, because my daughter was worried, because it was easier to believe that than to believe what I was starting to suspect. My wife and I built this life from nothing. I want you to understand that. My father drove a delivery truck. My mother cleaned houses. When I was 23, I borrowed $11,000 from my uncle and bought one used truck and one route. I slept 4 hours a night for 6 years. Loretta kept the books. She worked at a dentist's office full-time and kept my books at night on a yellow legal pad at the kitchen table while I was out doing runs. I couldn't afford to hire anyone else to do. We didn't take a vacation for the first 9 years. We didn't buy new furniture until the business had been profitable for 3 consecutive years. I was 40 before I bought a car that wasn't used. The farm is worth about $62 million now. That's the land, the equipment, the business, the property we own in 3 counties. We also have investments, the house, some other holdings. My attorney, a man named Hugh Alderton, who has been my attorney for 27 years, helped us structure everything into a trust years ago. Loretta and I have updated that trust 4 times. The last time was 8 months ago. Brandt didn't know that. I sat down at the kitchen table across from him that Tuesday afternoon, and I looked at the folder under his hand and I said, "What have you got there?" He said it was nothing, just some paperwork for work. I nodded. I said, "You don't usually bring your work paperwork to my kitchen table." My daughter said, "Dad, I'm talking to your husband," I said, not unkindly, just clearly. Brandt looked at me for a long moment. Then he moved his hand and pushed the folder toward me like it was casual, like he'd always been about to show me. "Just some planning documents. I've been doing some research about protecting assets when..." He paused. "In case Mom's condition changes." I opened the folder. It was a power of attorney form. My name was already typed in. There were 2 copies. I closed it. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the window above the sink. She wouldn't look at me. Who prepared this? I asked. A colleague of mine, Brand said. It's just a precaution. If something happens and you need someone to manage the finances, I have an attorney, I said. I've had the same attorney for 27 years. If I need planning documents prepared, I'll call him. Of course, Brant said. He took the folder back. Absolutely. I just thought since we're family, we are family, I said. That's exactly right. I finished my water. I stood up. I thanked them for stopping by, and I told my daughter I'd call her Thursday to check on the kids, and I walked to the back of the house and sat in my chair in the room where I keep my books, and I didn't move for a long time. That was when I knew. I called Hugh the next morning at 7:45. He picked up before the second ring, which is why I've kept him for 27 years. I told him what I'd seen. I told him about the folder. I told him about the questions Brand had been asking for the past year. I told him about a conversation my daughter had with Loretta 6 weeks earlier. I'd only heard pieces of it, but one piece was her asking whether Loretta had ever thought about simplifying things with the trust. Loretta had told me about it that evening with a look on her face I'd never seen before. She didn't say she was worried. She didn't have to. Hugh listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "Tell me everything you know about his finances." We talked for an hour and a half. What I knew is this. Brand had been with his insurance firm for 6 years and had done well, but 2 years ago, he'd made some investments that hadn't worked out the way he planned. I knew this because my daughter had mentioned it once, lightly, in passing, in the way she mentioned things she didn't want me to know she was worried about. I knew they'd refinanced their house. I knew they'd had a vacation planned last spring that got quietly canceled. Hugh said, "I want you to let me make some calls." I said, "Make them." What Hugh found over the next 3 weeks was worse than I'd let myself imagine. Brand had consulted 2 other attorneys in the past 18 months, not his work colleagues, estate attorneys. He'd asked both of them, separately, different firms, about the process of contesting a trust, about the conditions under which a trust could be challenged, about what happened to assets in a trust if the grantor was determined to be cognitively impaired. One of those attorneys had taken notes. Hugh got those notes through channels I won't describe here because I'm not entirely sure they were all above board, but Hugh has been doing this a long time, and I trust him completely. The notes described a client who wanted to know how quickly cognitive impairment could be established if there was a pattern of behavior to support it. The notes described a client who wanted to know whether a family member with power of attorney could make changes to a trust. The notes described my son-in-law. I sat in Hugh's office and read those notes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly. Something colder than anger. Something that settles into your joints and makes you very, very still. Hugh said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to be very careful. And I want to be very quiet. And I want to be very thorough." He said, "That's what I was hoping you'd say." We spent the next 4 months building something that could not be touched. I'll tell you what we did, because I think it matters that people understand what this kind of protection looks like. The trust was already solid. Hugh had made sure of that years ago, but we updated it again. We added language. We had Loretta and me both evaluated by 2 separate physicians. Not because either of us had any cognitive concerns, but because we wanted documentation. We wanted a paper trail that was iron. We added a no contest clause that was, as Hugh described it to me later, aggressive. We also made one other change. We changed the trustee. Brant and my daughter had assumed, because they'd been asking careful questions and building a careful picture, that I was the sole trustee of our trust. I had been, years ago. But Loretta and I had added a co-trustee structure when we updated it 8 months before. The co-trustee was a professional fiduciary firm that Hugh had worked with for over a decade. This meant that even if someone had obtained power of attorney over me, they could not touch the trust. The trust was managed by an independent professional who had no relationship with my family and no interest in anyone's outcome except the legal terms of the document. Brand didn't know any of this. During those 4 months, I watched him. I was pleasant. I had them over for dinner. I answered his questions with vague, reassuring non-answers. I complained mildly about getting older. I mentioned once, carefully, that I'd been thinking about whether it made sense to have someone help manage things. I watched his face when I said it. He worked very hard not to look pleased. My daughter. And this part is still hard for me to say out loud. My daughter knew more than I wanted her to know. I don't think she understood the full shape of what he was doing. I don't think she knew about the attorney consultations or the specific plan, but she knew that Brant was positioning himself. She knew he was maneuvering, and she didn't stop him. She didn't call me. She didn't warn her mother. She went along. That's the part that sits in my chest even now. Not what Brant did. I can explain what Brant did. He's a man who made bad financial decisions and saw a solution and pursued it without thinking very hard about the people he was pursuing it against. That's a kind of greed that I can categorize and set aside. What my daughter did is harder. She chose her comfort over her mother. She chose to look the other way at something she had to have known was wrong. I'm 68 years old, and she is my daughter, and I love her. I'm not going to pretend that I don't. But I also know now something about her that I didn't know before. And I can't unknow it. Hugh called me on a Wednesday morning in March and said, I think it's time. We had already decided to call it a family meeting. We told my daughter that Loretta and I wanted to talk through some things about the estate, just to make sure everyone was on the same page. We told her to bring Brant. We said Hugh would be there. Brant showed up in a suit. That's the detail I keep coming back to. He wore a suit to my house on a Saturday morning in March. Loretta was in the living room in her chair with a blanket over her lap, and he walked in wearing a jacket and tie, and I thought, he thinks today is the day he wins. We sat down in the living room. Hugh was there already. There was another man with him, one of Hugh's colleagues, a younger attorney named Cass, who sat in the corner with a legal pad and didn't say much. Brant asked, very politely, what the meeting was about. Hugh said, we want to walk through the current structure of the trust and make sure everything is clear. Brant settled back in his chair. My daughter looked at her hands. Hugh began. He explained the trust structure. He explained the updated terms. He explained the co-trustee arrangement, and I watched Brant's face when Hugh said the words independent, professional fiduciary, and I saw the moment the suit stopped fitting him right. Something shifted behind his eyes. He leaned forward very slightly. Hugh explained the no contest clause. He explained, in plain language, what it would cost anyone who attempted to challenge the trust on grounds of cognitive impairment, not just in legal fees, but in terms of what they would forfeit. He explained that both Loretta and I had received complete cognitive evaluations from 2 independent physicians 6 weeks ago and were documented as fully competent. He set 3 folders on the coffee table, one for each of them and one for the record. Brant picked up his folder and opened it. He looked at the first page. He looked at the second page. He turned to the third page and stopped. He sat like that for a while. Hugh said, "Do you have any questions?" Brant put the folder down on his knee and looked at me. Not at Hugh, at me. And for a moment I saw something real in his face. Not anger, not calculation, just recognition. He understood that I had known. He understood that I had let him talk and let him plan and let him wear his suit to my living room, and I had known the whole time. I looked back at him. I didn't say anything. My daughter said, "What does this mean?" Hugh said, "It means the trust is structured exactly as your parents intend it to be, and it is protected in a way that cannot be altered without your parents' full consent and the agreement of the fiduciary trustee." She said, "But Dad mentioned." She looked at me. "You said you were thinking about having someone help manage things." "I did," I said. "That's what the fiduciary is for." She understood then. I saw it. She understood that the thing Brant had been building toward for 2 years had already been accounted for and closed off before he'd even started. She looked at him. He was still looking at his folder. Hugh said there was one more item. He reached into his briefcase and took out a sealed envelope and set it on the table. He said, We've also taken the step of documenting several of the consultations your husband conducted over the past 18 months with outside estate attorneys. He said it carefully and professionally and without drama. The nature of those consultations and what they appear to indicate about intent is something we've shared with a colleague who specializes in financial elder abuse. Out of an abundance of caution. The room was very quiet. Brant said, That's not what those were. Hugh said, Okay. Brant said, I was just doing research for my own planning. Hugh said, Okay. He didn't argue it. He didn't need to. The folder was there. The envelope was there. Cass was in the corner with his legal pad. Hugh had a 27-year reputation in this county, and everyone in that room knew it. Brant put his folder on the coffee table and straightened his tie and said he appreciated the update. He asked if that was everything. Hugh said that was everything for today. They left about 20 minutes later. My daughter hugged me on the way out. It was a strange hug, too tight, too long, the way people hug when they don't know what else to do. I held on to her for a second. I said, Call me Thursday. She nodded against my shoulder. She didn't say anything else. Hugh stayed for another hour after they left. We sat in the kitchen, and I made coffee, and we went through the remaining details. He thought it was unlikely that Brant would try anything further given what had been documented. He wasn't certain. He's too careful a lawyer to be certain about human behavior, but he thought it was unlikely. He also told me, gently, that I should probably have a conversation with my daughter separate from Brant. At some point, when I was ready, I said I knew. He said, She may not have understood the full extent of it. I said, She understood enough. He didn't push it. That's another reason I've kept him 27 years. Loretta came into the kitchen after Hugh left. She poured herself a half cup of coffee and sat down across from me and looked at me for a while. She said, How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. I wanted to give her an honest answer. Tired, I said, and clear. She nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She has thin hands now. She's lost weight from the treatment. But her grip is still strong. It's always been stronger than you'd expect. She said, We built this together. We did, I said. Nobody takes that, she said. Nobody. I covered her hand with my other hand. Outside the kitchen window, the yard was just starting to go green. We planted those trees ourselves 20-some years ago, when the kids were small and the business was starting to get its legs. They're enormous now. They shade the whole back of the house. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I don't need it. I tell it because I know there are people listening who are in some version of this situation right now. Maybe it's a son-in-law like mine. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe you're watching someone in your family ask questions that are just a little too careful. Maybe you've noticed a folder on a table that got closed too fast. Here's what I want you to know. Get an attorney you trust and keep them. Update your documents. Get the evaluations. Build the paper trail before anyone thinks to question it. Don't wait until something happens. The best protection is the protection that's already in place. And don't let anyone make you feel like getting older means getting less sharp. I've been paying attention my entire life. That doesn't stop at 60. It doesn't stop at 68. If anything, I notice more now than I did at 40, because I've stopped being polite about what I see. Brant wore a suit to my house on a Saturday morning because he thought it was the day things went his way. It wasn't. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that living room. Not the legal part. Hugh handled that cleanly, and I'll be grateful for it the rest of my life. I mean, what happened underneath it, what it revealed about people, about choices, about the kind of person you become over time, based on the small decisions you make when you think nobody's watching. Brant made a calculation. He saw an aging man, a sick wife, a complicated estate, and he did the math the way he did everything, like it was a transaction. He was patient. He was methodical. He never once said anything overtly wrong. That's the thing about that kind of person. They don't announce themselves. They just slowly arrange things in their favor and wait. But here's what he missed. He was so focused on what he thought I was, a tired old man slowing down, that he never stopped to consider what I'd actually spent 68 years becoming. I didn't build a business from one used truck and 11,000 borrowed dollars by failing to notice things. I didn't keep that business for 4 decades by trusting the surface of situations. The very patience he was using against me was something I understood better than he did, because I'd been practicing it longer. That's not luck. That's not advantage. That's what happens when you spend a lifetime paying attention and doing the work, even when the work is hard and the reward is far away. Loretta and I didn't get careful in our 60s. We were always careful. We just stopped needing to prove it to anyone. What I want people to take from this, and I mean this plainly without dressing it up, is that integrity is not passive. It's not just not doing bad things. It's actively building something that reflects who you are, so that when someone comes along and tries to dismantle it, there's nothing there for them to grab onto. Hugh and I didn't build that protection in a panic after I found the folder on my kitchen table. We built it over years, in small, deliberate steps, because we believed it was the right way to manage what Loretta and I had worked for together. That's the thing that protected us. Not the legal language, not the fiduciary structure, not the no contest clause. Those were just the form. The substance was the 27 years of doing things the right way before any of this started. And my daughter. That's the part I sit with the longest. She's not a bad person. I've known her since the moment she was born, and I know what she's made of. But she let herself be led somewhere she should have refused to go, and the only reason, is that she stopped thinking clearly about what was right and started thinking about what was comfortable. That's a quiet erosion. It happens slowly. You tell yourself small things, and you believe them because believing them is easier than the alternative. And one day you're standing in your parents' living room while a lawyer explains a no contest clause. And you understand, in a way you can't walk back from, exactly how far you drifted. The hardest thing I know about getting older isn't the body. It's watching people you love make choices you can't make for them. All you can do is stay clear yourself, stay sharp, stay honest about what you see, even when you'd rather not see it. Brant wore a suit because he thought he was walking into his future. What he walked into instead was the result of every choice he'd made over 2 years, all of it waiting for him, documented on a coffee table in my living room. That's not a warning. That's not a warning. That's just how things work. Eventually, what you've actually been doing catches up with what you've been pretending to do. It always does.